You won't believe what went down when our greedy HOA president saw fit to bulldoze my disabled sister's wheelchair ramp when she was at work. But what this self-absorbed neighbor didn't get was that my sister was not just some resident, she was a state governor. And this was going to be the greatest mistake of Karen's HOA career. But how did the whole neighborhood get caught up in a national scandal? Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe. If you want more HOA and Karen stories, the bright yellow piece of paper plastered to our front door made my blood simmer. It was the 5th HOA violation notice I'd received this month, all regarding my sister Sarah's wheelchair ramp. I wadded it up and added it to my mounting collection of Karen Thompson's official warnings. As I heard Sarah's electric wheelchair whirring up the ramp behind me, another love letter from our great neighbor Sarah asked with a weary smile the dark circles under her eyes reflected how worn out she was from her new job, but she never complained, not about work, not about the car accident that left her in the wheelchair 6 months ago, and not even about Karen's incessant harassment. You'd think being HOA president would keep her busy enough without stalking our house, I said, observing from behind our kitchen window, as Karen stood in her front yard snapping pictures of our ramp with her cell phone. Her perfectly highlighted hair and designer workout gear couldn't conceal the look of utter spite on her face. I recall the day we put in the ramp. We had played by the book, followed every rule. There was hired a licensed contractor, obtained the correct permits from the city, and went so far as to use the same shade of gray paint as our house trim. But Karen arrived before the concrete even had a chance to dry, waving around the HOA rule book as if it were some sort of magic wand. Section 8, paragraph 3 specifically states that all exterior alterations are subject to the approval of the board. She had uttered, her voice dripping with artificial concern. We have to preserve our property values, you know. What really got to me was the way Karen kept inadvertently scheduling the HOA conferences regarding our ramp for when Sarah wasn't able to make it. Not that Sarah would have been able to anyway. She was too busy driving the state. Yeah, that's correct. My sister isn't any old homeowner. She's a governor. But we kept that under wraps in the neighborhood, wanting to keep some privacy going on during her recovery. Last week, I caught Karen taking measurements on the ramp with a tape measure at 6 a.m. when I approached her. She insisted she was only performing her duty as HOA president. I began keeping everything documented after that, taking videos, saving her notices, and keeping a close record of every exchange. Something in my stomach told me we'd be glad we'd done it. This morning was different, however, because I was helping Sarah into her car for a physical therapy appointment when I saw Karen crouched in conference with 2 men in suits outside her house, pointing at our ramp and making dramatic gestures. One of them was scribbling in a notebook, and the other was taking additional pictures. I don't. Such as this, I told Sarah, perhaps it's time we inform them who they're actually dealing with. Sarah shook her head. I won't use my office to try and get special treatment. We'll do this the proper way through the proper channels. But as I observed Karen's smug grin when she was dispensing thick manila envelopes to the men in suits, I couldn't help but feel that playing by the rules would not be sufficient this time. I pulled out my phone and began recording, capturing Karen's voice broadcast across our backyards. On the morning breeze, yes, we'll be needing that bulldozer here bright and early tomorrow morning. The board has already signed off on tearing out my heart. Skipped a beat. They wouldn't actually dismantle a wheelchair ramp. Well, as Sarah's car vanished around the bend, I dashed indoors to scan our security monitors and access our file of permits. But what I found in our records would rock everything a fine that would have Karen wishing she'd never discovered. I was having breakfast when I heard the sound of heavy equipment outside our house. My spoon clattered against a bowl as I hurried to the window, and my heart almost stopped. There was Karen standing in our front yard, wearing her telltale red blazer and perfectly coiffed blonde hair, pointing at our wheelchair ramp, while a man wearing a construction hat nodded in agreement. I grabbed my phone to catch it all as I sprinted outside, the morning sun barely up, and most of our neighbors still sleeping. A bright yellow bulldozer parked in our driveway, its metal blade shining. Ominously, 2 workers in orange vests were taping off the ramp with vibrant yellow tape measures, and Karen was holding a pile of papers to her chest as if they were gold. What are you doing? I asked, my voice not as steady as I had hoped. Karen's face brightened with that phony smile she reserved for HOA meetings. Oh, good, you're home. She bubbled over to me in her designer heels that settled a little into our newly mowed grass. I have here an emergency directive from the HOA board. This building is in direct contravention of community regulations. Section 4.23, she waved a piece of paper in my face, but withdrew it before I could take it. Karen, we filled out all the correct paperwork. We have city approval of the city. It is not the HOA, dear. She interrupted, her smile never faltering. And as president of the board, as such is my responsibility, to uphold our community's standards. This ramp is an eyesore, and it's devaluing property. Just look at how garish it looks against the neighborhood aesthetic. The bulldozer gunned its engine, and I felt my stomach lurch. I brought up the maps of property that Sarah had told me to save, displaying our property lines. And permits, this is illegal. You can't just knock down someone's house without notice or a court order. But Karen just laughed a high-pitched laugh that made my skin crawl. Notice was given 3 weeks ago, Viaduct certified mail. We have the receipt right here. She pulled out another document with a signature I'd never seen before. I frantically fed Sarah's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Of course, she was in that closed-door budget meeting today. I tried her assistant, her security team, anyone I could think of, but nobody was answering. Construction workers began setting up orange cones around our driveway. One of them looked confused, double-checking his paperwork several times. I saw him muttering to his friend, pointing at something that didn't look quite right. If you do this, I warned, my voice firming up, you'll be hearing from our lawyers at a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I went ahead and live streamed the whole thing on my phone, going out my way to get every detail. Karen's smile finally wavered for a second. The HOA is exempt from no HOA, is exempt from federal law. I yelled loud enough, lights began coming on in the other houses in our neighborhood. Our elderly neighbor, Mr. Rodriguez, stuck his head out his front door, then went back inside when he caught sight of Karen, but she had already turned around to the bulldozer operator, giving him a curt nod. The machine growled to life, its treads grinding against our driveway. I stood in horror as the blade descended toward the ramp that we had spent weeks getting installed. Just right, last chance, Karen. I said, my phone clutched in my hand. You're making a tremendous error. She turned to me again, her smile forced on her face. The only error was letting this abomination be constructed in the first place. Sometimes individuals must learn that rules are created for a purpose. The bulldozer blade hit the edge of the ramp with an awful screech of metal on concrete. I was continuing to film as pieces of our meticulously built ramp started to fall apart. What they didn't realize was Mr. Rodriguez had come back with his own camera, and other neighbors were arriving, phones aloft. Just moments ago, my phone vibrated with text. It was from Sarah's head of security. Remain calm. Continue filming. Help 3 minutes away. I smiled for the first time that day, observing Karen lead the demolition of our ramp like a maestro in an orchestra. She was so caught up in winning that she didn't observe the black SUVs making turns onto our block or the distant hum of sirens getting closer. Occasionally, the greatest mistakes result from the smallest pieces of incomplete information, such as not realizing your seemingly average neighbor is really one of the most influential individuals in the state. And Karen was going to have that lesson learned the hard way. I'll never forget the afternoon our tranquil suburban street became what appeared to be a set for a film, just when Karen was too busy high-fiving her Choi buddies about their successful eviction of the ISO. The lead black SUV came around the corner. Then another and another, flashing red and blue lights began to illuminate everywhere. My hands were trembling as I hit record on my phone. This was going to be juicy. The expression on Karen's face shifted from smug contentment to puzzlement as 3 state police cars arrived, followed by 5 others that were exactly like black government cars and neighbors who had been peering through their curtains all day now overspilled onto their front lawns. Everyone knew that something big was about to go down. What is all this, Karen demanded, her voice breaking slightly. This is a personal neighborhood issue. That's when Sarah's advanced security details emerged, scanning around before opening the rear door of the center SUV. The street grew dead quiet as my sister emerged in her wheelchair, in her official governor's blazer, and the stern face I'd only ever seen her wear at major press conferences. In fact, Mrs. Thompson, Sarah's voice echoed clear and strong. This became a state issue the instant you broke federal disability protection legislation. She wheeled out her security team, advancing in immaculate formation around her, not to mention demolishing state property without permission. Karen's face cycled through perhaps 5 different emotions in 3 seconds. State property. She squeaked yes. Sarah kept extracting her phone. Would you like to see the deed? Or shall we talk Americans with Disabilities Act first? I'm very comfortable with title, having just signed new state protections last month. The cluster of neighbors continued to build. I caught at least a dozen phones filming everything. Mrs. Jenkins from the other side of the street was already streaming live on Facebook. But the HOA bylaws specifically state Karen backed away, holding her beloved violation. Notices, curious, you bring those up, Sarah interrupted, gesturing to her aide, who came forward with a fat binder. My attorneys have spent all afternoon combing over your HOA bylaws. Do you want to hear what we uncovered? I observed as Karen's HOA board members began to creep away from her good move. Several state housing code violations, discriminatory practices, and Sarah hesitated for effect. Bizarre financial records dating back 3 years. Ears, the crowd gasped. I took a close-up of Karen's face with my phone as it paled whiter than those violation notices that she loved so much. This isn't, I didn't realize, Karen stuttered, that I was the governor. Sarah finished for her. Well, that bulldozing someone who is disabled's access ramp without adequate notice or permits is a federal crime to state. Investigators stepped forward, notebooks in hand behind them. I could see news vans rolling up at the far end of our street. Mrs. Thompson, one investigator, stood up. Will require you to accompany us to provide some answers regarding today's occurrences and these financial irregularities. As Karen was led off, still muttering about house values and HOA regulations, Sarah turned to address the crowd of onlookers. She was every inch the leader she was, even sitting in her wheelchair amidst the wreckage of our ramp. My fellow neighbor, she started. Today we get to talk about what community truly is. She pointed a leveled ramp. This isn't about me or my ability to access my home. This is about every human's right to live with dignity in their own community. The faces in the crowd reflected shame, anger, and most importantly, comprehension. But as I saw Karen being led away in a police car, still holding her HOA rule book, I couldn't help but question what would become of our quiet neighborhood following this volatile night, and more. More importantly, how many other HOAs out there were playing the same game Karen had been getting away with for years. The day after the bulldozing fiasco, I woke up to my phone ringing nonstop. Our SEC security camera video had gone viral overnight, and news vans were already queued up outside our house. But that was even the most unbelievable part. My former high school buddy, who turned into a civil rights attorney, had called with stunning news regarding Karen's previous HOA infractions. I couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing when I opened the files he sent Karen. With the RAM pieces still lying behind her, the reporters lost it when she produced a stack of documents detailing how Karen had violated not only federal disability codes, but also broke 17 various state housing laws. But here's the really cool part. Our elderly neighbors began coming forward one at a time. Mrs. Chun across the street disclosed how Karen had compelled her to have her medical garden removed. Mr. Rodriguez provided proof of how she targeted him for having a wheelchair lift installed on his veteran father. Even the reserved Baker family came forward about being threatened with fines for their autistic son's sensory-friendly playground equipment. Neighborhood I'd known for years suddenly felt like other people were speaking to one another, exchanging stories and holding hands. Karen attempted to call an emergency HOA meeting to take care of these unsubstantiated claims, but no one appeared except her two devoted supporters from the board. Meanwhile, Sarah had invited disability rights activists to our home, and half of the community came to learn about accessible housing rights. Just when we thought things could not get more heated, someone leaked Karen's HOA financial records. Turns out she'd been using the assessment money she collected to fund her own home improvements, stating that they were board-approved community upgrades. The lawyer, the HOA, resigned on the spot, and 3 board members stepped down via irate emails that managed to somehow end up on the local news. Karen still refused to back down. She appeared at our home the following morning with a cease and desist letter telling us to stop spreading falsehoods about her. What she did not anticipate was to unwittingly walk into a meeting between Sarah and the state housing commissioner, who was very interested in seeing every HOA decision Karen made in the last 5 years. The expression on Karen's face when she saw her HOA reign of terror falling apart around her was just about worth all the drama, almost. But the highlight was seeing our neighbors place and report accessible housing signs on their lawns one at a time until Karen's house stood alone. Without one, the news helicopters flying overhead got it all, and by sunset, our tale had hit national news as I sat and watched more neighbors congregate on our lawn that night, sharing stories and a plan for a new inclusive HOA. I couldn't help but ask, how did one wheelchair ramp ignite such a huge transformation? But the evening wasn't through. Sarah had just been presented with some unusual papers regarding the bulldozing firm connection to Karen's personal contracting business. The following morning, I woke up to hundreds of messages from neighbors with their own HOA horror stories. My phone continued to ring with news reporters wanted to discuss what transpired, but what got my attention was an email from Mrs. Rodriguez, our older neighbor whom Karen had fined last month for having a garden gnome, I printed out all the HOA rules and spent the entire day underlining the sections Karen had disobeyed. Sarah's lawyer found out Karen never even filed the proper papers to be elected HOA president. She just moved into position when the old president relocated, and nobody had the courage to challenge her. The more we investigated, the more we uncovered the dirt, then something incredible happened to our tale. Reach Tommy Chin, a popular YouTube attorney who creates videos on unjust housing regulations. He flew out to see Sarah and volunteered to represent us, sue Karen. And the HOA pro bono his video on our case received millions of views. Within a single day, Karen attempted to save herself by scheduling an emergency HOA meeting. But this time was different. Instead of her typical empty room with 2 sleeping neighbors, the community center was full of people who never raised their voices. Before spoke about Karen's intimidation, Mr. Jenkins presented photos of his daughter's treehouse, which Karen forced him to demolish. The Wilson family discussed their Christmas lights Karen said were too bright. Sarah rolled up to the microphone and spoke not just about the ramp, but revealed her grand scheme. She'd been writing a new law to defend homeowners from HOA abuse. The room exploded in applause when she said it would be named the Right to Home Happiness Act. But the coup de grace, our security camera caught Karen lying on official documents about obtaining permission to bulldoze the ramp. That's when her own attorney dumped her. Case 2 days after that, we saw Karen packing up her prize robe bushes, the one she'd bullied everyone else into replicating, and relocating the new HOA board. It's incredible they converted the old violations office into a community assistance center. Now, rather than sending out fines, they send welcome baskets to new neighbors. They even implement a program to assist elderly residents with home repairs. Sarah's ramp got redone, but better than ever, local artists painted it with gorgeous flowers in it. Has neat lights that make it glow softly. At night, children from a neighborhood actually believe it's the prettiest thing on our street. Last week, Sarah had a barbecue for the entire neighborhood in our backyard. Observing all of them laugh and bond, where Karen used a stand yelling about grass height regulations, made me aware of something gigantic. Sometimes the worst seconds create the best transformations. Remember that Bulldozer Company. They now provide free ramp installations to disabled residents throughout the state, and their CEO personally apologized to Sarah. They even established a scholarship fund for students of disability rights law. The greatest surprise was yesterday. I was promoted to lead the state's new homeowner protection agency. My first assignment, educating other neighborhoods how to transform their HOAs from bullies into helpers. Sarah says we're just beginning. And you know what, considering how much has changed in just 1 year. I think she's right. Our story even found its way into school textbooks as a lesson on standing up against unfair rules. But the true victory isn't in the headlines or the new legislation. It's in the small things, such as noticing Mrs. Rodriguez's army of garden gnomes increasing in size each week, or observing children playing freely on their front lawns without worrying about violation. Notices Karen's house just sold last week. The new household, they have 3 children, 2 canines, and guess what's in their front yard? A wheelchair ramp for their grandmother. No one complained. Instead, 5 neighbors attended to system unpacked. That's when I realized we didn't simply change an HOA, we changed mine.